Good morning. I'm Glenn Lowry, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this preview for Edgar Degas, A Strange New Beauty, an exhibition brilliantly organized by Jodi Hauptman, Senior Curator in the Department of Drawings and Prints, along with, can I say it, her erstwhile colleague and companion, Carl Buchberg, Senior Conservator, and Heidi Herschel, Curatorial Assistant. In fact, a team that has brought us many great projects and exhibitions, and we're thrilled with this one. We're also very grateful to Richard Kendall, an independent art historian, who joined as well. As all of you know, exhibitions like this can't happen without considerable support from various donors, and we're very grateful to the Philip and Janice Levin Foundation, as well as the Lehman Foundation, Sue and Edgar Wachenheim III, Denise Littlefield-Sobel, Mary Spencer, Diane Woodner, and Farrow and Ball. What would we do without Farrow and Ball and color? We received an indemnity from the Federal Council on the Arts and Humanities, and as I often do, I can't emphasize enough how important that indemnity is, because without it, it would be almost impossible for many American museums to mount large-scale exhibitions that draw on loans from abroad. So Jodi, here we are with A Strange New Beauty, and I want to start with, what is it about Degas' work that caught your attention today?
Well, I think in some ways the show is very much about experimentation. You know, the monotypes, focusing on the monotypes is a kind of case study in that experimentation, and that's what really drew me to him. Just thinking about the way, when we think about the foundational figures for the artists in our collection, who are they? And Degas is certainly one of them. He's had an incredible influence on artists of the 20th century, and part of that was the way he experimented. He always, really took things as far as they could go.
I'm sure everybody knows what a monotype is, but talk about the monotype as a process and what Degas does to it.
Well, to start, a monotype is essentially a hybrid of drawing and printmaking. It's a drawing that's printed, so the artist draws on a metal plate with black printer's ink, and then the plate is sandwiched with a piece of paper and run through a press. And the result is usually a single impression, and kind of you peel it off and there's a reveal. But Degas, who is always interested in using materials in different ways, in unconventional ways, he often would make a second pull and from that plate. And so he would use the ink that was left, and he would get a ghost image or a degraded image. And with that image, he would often enhance it with pastel, creating two works that were both the same and different from each other. So there's this that aspect of it where you see him where you see the monotype fueling ideas about repetition and transformation, but also monotype itself, because you can change the image right up to the point of printmaking, right up to the point where you put it through the press. So you can, if you don't like it, you can wipe it away and start again. So the kind of spontaneity that and malleability that monotype provides was very important for him, and also just because the plate itself is slick and the ink is viscous, he could move the ink, manipulate it in a kind of gestural way, and that allowed, really changed his art forever, because he had really been trained in a precise kind of drawing, and this allowed a looser, more gestural kind of mark making.
Why didn't he just do it directly on paper? Why did he need to use the process of printing to do this?
Well, I think one of the reasons is that he's an inveterate experimenter, and he was already making prints, and he was just interested in what things could do. How he would do things like, when he worked with pastel, he would wet it. So he took a chalky medium and made it wet, or he'd take a wet medium and make it dry. So he's always interested in what materials could do. So I think kind of first off, there was just that, just the interest in that and the adventure it would spark. But also, Monotype did certain things for him, and I think one is, as I've described, is that kind of slickness of the plate that allowed that loose movement. And if you think about drawing on paper or painting on canvas, those supports have a kind of, sometimes even a small texture that resists, the medium. And so with Monotype, you can really kind of move easily. And then, what you get, whether you get one or two impressions, the kind of tones that you get are very different than what you get with regular drawing.
So there are a number of different series, in a way. I'm not sure whether one can even call them series when you're dealing with monotypes, but a number of different series where you really begin to see him working out each of these different possibilities, iterations. Can you talk a little bit about what how these develop? In other words, can one describe a process from the simple to the complicated, or from the dark to the light? What is he actually, as he's experimenting and using plates over and over again, do you have a sense of what he's actually striving for, or is it different in each series?
Well, I think overall, one of the things that he's trying to get at is what are the correct means for new subjects, or how do new subjects demand new means? And so, when I say new subjects, I'm thinking about modern life. What is it? Degas was interested in depicting the world around him, and so when he makes images of ballet dancers or cafe singers, he's thinking about the expansion of commercial entertainment. And within those, he's also thinking about the impact of electricity, which was a new kind of lighting in Paris at that time. So how do you depict that? How do you express the effect of that new kind of lighting on a body or on a stage? And so I think monotypes really serve those purposes for him. So that's one way that that monotype was a kind of, I think for him, a perfect medium. And so. And you really see that in the exhibition. Whether you see an illuminated singer or a dancer.
We're almost conditioned to think of Degas and ballet dancers or cafe life, but in fact, one of the most potent images in the exhibition, for me at least, it's a very small image. It's virtually the last image you see as you're walking back out of the show, and that's a series of smokestacks. Do you want to talk about that aspect of the urban environment that he was picking up on?
Well, I think, again, there's this interest in depicting these changes in modern life. And so that work of smoke coming out of factory smokestacks, it just seemed to us as such an emblem of the changing nature of the urban environment in the 19th century, and Degas searching for a way to depict that. And there's a beautiful analogy there also, because if you think about the smoke wafting into the sky, it's similar to the way kind of ink might move across the plate. So we kind of loved Degas making those connections between his subject and his materials. I think also there's this issue of depicting movement, because you raised ballerinas, so we can't not think about ballerinas with Degas. But with the monotypes, his monotypes of ballerinas, I think he's really finally kind of getting a way to depict motion. And at some point he's asked, by a collector, why do you paint dancers? And he says, well, it's just an excuse to depict movement. But in his painting, he doesn't ever seem to really get at the kind of feeling of leaping or arabesquing or dropping into a curtsy. But with Monotype, because there is that kind of gesture in the mark, he's able to express those leaps in a much more, I think, convincing and kind of visceral way.
I was struck in sort of just the kind of layout of the exhibition, that it moves from small and dark to large and light, as if that last room, as you're progressing along the axis of the show, kind of is transformative, right? Both in terms of the scale of the work, but also the impact of color. And walk us through the exhibition and sort of the key points along that route.
Well, I think the exhibition is something of an adventure. Degas is introduced to this medium by his friend Lepic, and he immerses in it kind of completely. He just embraces it. And I have this sense, and I keep saying to people, if visitors leave with a sense of Degas covered up to his elbows with ink, just really just just covered with these materials, then the exhibition will be a success. So I think that first room is really about immersion, and there's one of his friends writes a letter, and we have it in the exhibition, this quote where he says, he's no longer a man, he's a plate. He's gone through the press. He's completely combined with his materials. So I think the exhibition starts with that idea, this introduction, this immersion, this adventure, and the second room of cafe singers and dancers and the brothel scenes are all these ways that Degas is trying to figure out how to use monotype to depict aspects of modern life. And then the next two rooms of the dark field bathers and the landscapes is really where
Talk about what dark field means.
Okay.
Sorry.
Where he really hits it. And so we've kind of in the literature, the monotypes are divided into dark field and light field. And light field is essentially drawing on the plate with the ink, just as you would draw on a piece of paper. And the dark field is when he lays a curtain of ink on the plate and draws by removal. So the image appears to emerge out of darkness. And it's in those works where we really see a kind of control of the medium, where the plates have gotten bigger, he's more ambitious. And then he puts monotype aside. And then a number of years later, in 1890, so he leaves the dark field, he leaves the black ink monotypes in the mid-1880s. 1890, he begins a new experiment. So again, another adventure where he's using oil paint instead of printer's ink. And so he's able to work in color. And so you get these really incredibly beautiful landscapes that are, they allude to the natural world, but they also verge on abstraction. And you see Degas, really following what the oil paint could do in those prints. And I think those maybe are the most surprising moments in the exhibition for people who know Degas' work, because we know the dancers, we know the singers, but there's probably many people of our visitors who won't have any idea he made these landscapes. And I think when you look at them, you have to think, how could they have been made in 1890? I mean, they're so radical, so experimental, so so abstract. So that's where the monotype production ends. But in approaching the subject, we thought, well, what did monotype do for Degas? What did this adventure, this experimentation, what did it do for his practice more generally? And so that's what we try to answer in that last room, where the works get bigger and, as you say, more colorful. And so I think there are a number of issues we wanted to point out there. One is that from monotype, he understands that you can make two things that are the same and different. And so it fuels his interest in repetition and transformation, and this idea that a work is not a single thing, an image is not a single thing. There's always a possibility of another kind of image. And so, often when we think about drawing our works on paper kind of leading to a painting as a final result, for Degas, there was no hierarchy there. It was just another opportunity to make an image. Like, let's take two dancers and let's make them in charcoal, and then let's flip them, and then let's remove one of the dancers, and then let's add the dancer back and add pastel. And so it's just this chain of images. So this idea about an art making process that's about endless iteration, endless innovation, I think is what we try to show in that last room. And then also what he learned in terms of handling of the pigment in monotype, the idea of getting his hands dirty, using his fingers, being more gestural. And I think you really see that on that very last wall of Bathers, where you see these walls that are made with his fingerprints, or even bodies made with fingerprints, or even the approach to the body, where you get these twisted and turned forms that really comes out of the monotypes.
So when last seen in Henri Matisse, The Cutouts, Carl Buchberg was diligently peeling back thousands of strands of burlap in order to conserve the museum's swimming pool. Were there conservation surprises here? What did the research on these monotypes reveal?
Well, I mean, I think overall we were, because this was a partnership, again, between me and Carl, that that we really focused on process, and we kept trying to answer the question: what did Monotype do for Degas? What did the process do? What did it encourage? How do materials or methods kind of make, transform a work or make a work the way it is? And I don't know, maybe should we ask Carl to give I don't know if there's an example that that he can, I mean, I can think of some where we learned some things, but I think.
In the small video that you see when you first come in, we highlight both dark field and light field. But I think our biggest discovery and what we're trying to get across to our audience is that in many of the prints he used both dark field or subtractive techniques and additive techniques. So sometimes he would go in and paint an entire veil of black, and then he would remove a little bit. Then he would actually, this better, no.
Here, just give him mine.
I can probably screen. Then he would take the brush and add, or he would use his fingers. So there was a back and forth between the additive and the subtractive. And what we're hoping is, we saw that, and what we're hoping is that our visitors will be able to take the magnifying glasses and get really close and see the sophistication in the manipulation.
Did everybody get a chance to hear what Carl was getting at? Good. Thank you, Carl. As always, I do want to underscore that one of the great pleasures of working in an institution like this one is the depth of research that takes place here and the incredible work that curators and conservators do together as they peel back artistic processes to actually understand why and how a work of art is made. And I don't think anyone does it in a more exemplary fashion than you, Carl, and Jodi. And so behind this exhibition, which is in many ways a feast for the eyes and a way of understanding how Degas saw Paris at the end of the 19th century, is also a deeply art historical exercise in understanding how works of art are actually made.
Right, and I think just to underscore that, I think what we hope visitors will do is really slow down and look closely. This is where we want to encourage that close looking because there's so many wonderful details. The way Degas uses his own hands, you can go through and find fingerprints in so many of the works. Just a landscape that's made with just a movement across the plate horizontally. It's just amazing what one can do with your own fingertips.
Well, and of course that brings up the whole anticipatory issue or the proleptic issue of Jasper Johns in the handprint. In other words, there's so much that's embedded in Degas' practice that then becomes, in one form or another, absolutely part of contemporary art today.
Right. I think Jasper Johns is a perfect kind of comparison because he's another artist where printmaking is so much a part of his process, such a driver, a fuel for experiment. But I think also Degas himself is such a model of somebody who was willing to defy conventions in his process. And so it's so much about the avant-garde, saying no to the past, reaching for something new, always pushing forward. And I think that's what we hope that people see in this exhibition, that really that search for the new.
I want to come back to that search for the new and a strange beauty and subject matter, because we may take for granted now some of the scenes that Degas depicted, but in fact, as you were saying earlier, he was really looking to move away from any kind of historical representation to depicting life as it was lived at that moment in Paris, and presumably very conscious of these dramatic transformations that were taking place through industrialization, the advent of electricity, and other sort of modern isms. Do you want to just sort of wrap on that a little bit, and then we'll turn it over to everybody here.
Well, one other story I would just tell that's related to that, and it shows a real self-consciousness about Degas' sense of his own modern vision, is about the landscapes. And so when he's asked about the making of those, and he says that, and I'm paraphrasing, that they were inspired by the view out of a moving train. And so you have a sense of an artist who's trying to capture a new way of seeing. And it's true, this is about, in the early 1890s, so the train isn't absolutely new, but there still was this idea that you had grown up moving only as fast as the speed of a horse and carriage. And what does it feel like then to be on a train as it moves through a landscape? And how does that landscape look? And how does that experience completely change how you see your environment? And I think Degas was so able to capture that. Certainly the landscapes try to do that, but he was conscious of how does an artist do that? What are the materials he uses to capture those changes? And Monotype, I think, on these variety of things that you just mentioned, and in the case of the landscapes, really really kind of get him there.
But he's also interested in photography and, in a way, anticipates cinematic images, right? These serial images that are additive, that tell a story if you look at them across enough iterations.
Right, you can't help but think of the cinema. And of course, cinema emerges in 1893, and this is when Degas is really working full force in these series. And he's interested in photographers like Muybridge and Maré, who are doing these time motion studies. So there's this big push to kind of express movement. But I think the idea of kind of repetition and movement is rooted in his printmaking practices.
So let's turn it over to all of you for any questions that you might have. For Jodi or Carl, please, right there. We'll pass the microphone around so we can all hear the question.
I know Mary Cassatt was working on, I'm not sure literally side by side with Degas in the early phase of printmaking, but I'm wondering, was their rapport together when they were both working on it sort of competitive? He's often seen as her mentor, but was she stimulating him in a competitive sense too?
Right. Well, that's a topic that was really beautifully explored in the National Gallery's exhibition on Cassatt Degas, and there's quite a bit of time in that exhibition devoted to their printmaking kind of dialogue. And I think, I think that you can't help when you look at their prints side by side to see, the way it went both ways. And Cassatt was also experimenting, but I think, Degas was so, sending recipes out to friends, saying you should try this or you should try that. So he loved playing that role, and in fact he had a press in his studio, printing press, which of course we wish had been saved. How great would it have been to have seen that? But he would sometimes offer to make prints for colleagues in the studio. So there was always this dialogue.
Yes, right there.
Yeah, I'm curious because it looks like you gathered these works from so many different places. First of all, the challenge of that, and also whether you found anything new and unexpected in your search.
That's a great question, and often not discussed at exhibitions, which is what's required, the research, the cajoling, the seduction, the relentlessness of the curator in putting this together.
Right. The relentlessness only matched by Degas' own tenacity, I think. So there are 89 lenders to the exhibition. There are 180 works in the exhibition, 89 lenders. Half from the United States and half from outside of it. Half are public and half are private. So that just gives you maybe the sense of the landscape of trying to find these things. I think that there were certain works that we were just desperate to have. That's always the case. And And I think in terms of discoveries was really finding some of these cognate pairs, what we call the first pull and the first impression from the plate, the second ghost print that is then enhanced with pastel, and bringing those together because they always come from different collections, and finding them at all. That was an enormous challenge, and one that we were just absolutely committed to making happen. So I think tremendous time was spent just tracking those down, because I think seeing those pairs is so instructive in what an artist can do with a single image, how much you can change it.
And in the sort of pantheon of complexity that any exhibition produces, works on paper with pastel are always at the far end of difficulty, because pastel often isn't adhered to the surface of paper. So lenders can be very cautious about the transportation of their precious, rightly works that have pastel. And so every exhibition has its problems, but anytime you're dealing with works that have a lot of pastel in them, you're dealing with another level of anxiety on the part of potential lenders, whether they're private or public. And it goes without saying that we're deeply grateful to all of those lenders who made an incredible effort to share their works of art with us. Some very infrequently traveled.
Just such a, it's just a tremendous act of generosity on the part of both certainly private collectors who are taking these things off their wall and often just leaving a space there, and our colleagues at other institutions. And I think Carl would agree with me, wherever we went, there was such curiosity about the research. So we would visit various museums and look together with conservators and curators in labs and look under the microscope together. And I think that sense of curiosity, I hope is really, I hope that you can see it in the exhibition.
And I might just do a shout out to Rusty Powell at the National Gallery, which was a major lender to this exhibition, and his belief in this project and willingness to support it ensured that a number of absolutely critical works were here, but so did many other lenders. We'll take another question. In the back, yes?
I'm assuming it was an oil-based ink that was used for the monotypes, and I was wondering, was it also oil-based pastels, and is there an issue with adherence of the pastel over the ink?
I'm going to turn that one over to Carl.
The printing ink, indeed, the etching ink, indeed, is oil-based. The landscape monotypes, which are in color, is actually from oil paint, made from oil paint, so it's the exact same palette that he was using when he was painting. The pastel is not oil-based. It's bound with a gum. It's extremely underbrowned. It's very particulate, and that's the way it looks, the way it does. The pastel was very often added later on so that the ink was not wet when he was adding it. It was dry. And depending on the individual work, there is, yes, can be a severe problem with its adherence to the pastel, to the underlayer, which is why we are very lucky to have the loans that we do and why we did not get some that we didn't. Degas was probably the greatest pastel art of his generation and of our entire period. There were many ways that he manipulated the pastel. Sometimes he just took the stick and added it, drew with a stick. Sometimes he would dip it into water and make a mark. Sometimes he would dip it into turpentine and make a mark. Sometimes he would actually take a pastel stick, crush it up, add water, and then apply it with a brush. So every one of the ones that you see might have a slight different variation. He was also famous for fixing his pastel, that is, adding a fixative so that it would adhere more strongly. And also so that he would fix an underlayer so that the top layer, which he would not fix, would have that very particulate layer on top of something which was fixed. Great sophistication and technique.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, over there in the...
Thank you, and thank you for a wonderful show. It's beautiful. I just came from the Commission on Status of Women, which has been going on for 2 weeks, and it's so striking to see these brothel pictures. Beautiful and offensive at the same time, and it wasn't clear what his relationship was to. In fact, it's raised in the little script. Did he have an offense towards them? Did he understand them? He also, as someone pointed out, seemed to have a relationship to the injustice of the women doing the laundry work, understanding the beauty of it aesthetically, but also the pain of doing that kind of work. Do you know more about his relationship to prostitution? Thank you.
Well, I think what I would say is that as part of his interest in depicting all aspects of modern life, so whether it's commercial entertainment or commerce in the sense of, in the case of the brothels, it was his interest in depicting all of those places. So for him, the brothel was another site, like the laundry, like the cafe, like the ballet, to depict. So it was part of that landscape that he was interested in.
But the question is a good one, and certainly the issues of prostitution in late 19th century European and especially French art is an important question in terms of where artists located themselves along a very big spectrum.
Right, and I think that you can also, there's different ways to see these works. Like you said, I think you yourself said they're both beautiful, and I can't remember the offensive that you used, and they've been seen since Degas' nudes. Not only the monotypes, but other works have been seen in both ways since they were first seen in the 1880s. So critics have been kind of on both sides of that divide. Are they someone describes them, do they show the gaze of a surgeon, so very realistic, or are they more kind of difficult or voyeuristic? And I would say, like, this is a man making images of a woman, sometimes in private spaces. So there is an inherent voyeurism there. Like, we can't, like, it's there, right? But I think that also one of the things that we see in these images is a deep sense of privacy. And that's in the room that we've been calling these dark field bathers, where he somehow taps into how to depict privacy, like really isolation, insulation. And so I think it's both. You said it yourself. I think it's really both ways. There's multiple viewing positions here.
Thank you, an excellent question. Others? Thank you, Lee. I was wondering, I could not go through a morning without a question from you.
Maybe I'll pass. It may be a stupid question. I wanted a little more about the reason for the abstraction in the landscape all of a sudden. It's such a startling change. Now, the moving through the train is one thing, but was there something deeper going on? What drove that move to abstraction, which was, as you said, very radical? Is there any more to be said about that?
Great question, in fact.
I think that that one reason is really an interest in materials, and we could maybe bring Carl in again. But oil paint is is a more liquid medium than the printer's ink. So when you lay it on the plate, it responds to the press in a different way. And so I'm sure if we look at the work behind us, where you have that emerald green, what we've been calling the smush, where he would have laid this ink, the oil paint on the plate, and then as the press, it would have been a lot of oil paint, and as the press went over it, it literally smushed it. And so you get something that's both, that doesn't really have a narrative function, but it has a kind of pictorial function. And I think he was someone who was so deeply attuned to how his materials worked, and then how to transgress them, how to make them do something that they were not meant to do. And I think that the oil, in some ways, this is a case where materials or an engagement with materials actually does push an artist to go somewhere that maybe he or she wouldn't go to, which is abstraction, which wasn't, again, I think when you look at these and you think, I can't believe these were made in 1890, but I think there is something materially there that pushed him in a certain direction as he was working on the press in 1890, the first time he kind of delves into these landscapes. I don't know, would you, Carl, agree with that about the
Yes,
the
I think
reaction of the pigment?
one of the discoveries, and you'll see when you look at the video, is that we visited Jungle Press in Brooklyn and made monotypes with the two master printmakers. And we did both dark field, light field, and also landscapes in oil. You will see that when you see the cognate pairs, especially the ones that do not have a lot of pastel over them, that with the black printer's ink, the second pull was always what Jodi is calling a degraded image. But with the landscape, it's really a different process. And what we learned was that Degas must have put a layer of oil paint on, and then he added another layer of oil paint to complete a composition. And then when he printed the first one, you got one kind of image, and then the second one is not a degraded image. It's really a variant where you see that underlayer in its more complete. And it is our belief, although we have no first pull for the one you're looking at on the screen, that perhaps the mountains in the background in brown and the tree is actually had already been pulled once, and that in the second pull he added the oil paint, the green blob as we call it, and then the pressure of the press pushed it down. So the landscapes do have that added chance as part of them. One thing that's a difference also between the landscapes and the monochromatic monotypes is that, except for one or two variants, there are no true duos of impressions. That is, that he made a first pull, then added more black ink, and then took a second pull. It's always the same inking. With the landscapes, he would do one pull, then add more oil paint, and then do a second pull.
Super. We'll take one final question if there is one. Yes, please.
I'm wondering if you encountered the subject of Degas' vision loss at all while you were researching for this show, and if so, how that factored into your process of working with his works?
Well, as some of you may know, he always had a little bit of trouble with his eyes from being from his being a young man, and he was always worried about his eyes. He took very good care of his eyes, but yeah, toward the end of his life. We looked at, we talked to various Degas experts. There's a lot of literature about that. But as far as the monotypes go, it's really, his vision is mostly, we didn't find that to be kind of a big impact, I guess I would say, for the monotypes in particular. And I think in the scholarship, there's some back and forth about how much it affected his work.
Thank you. Thank you, Jodi. Thank you, Carl. Thank you all for joining us this morning.